The moving truck's headlights swept across my dark front windows at 9:40 on Christmas Eve, and I sat in my car 3 driveways down, watching my family unload boxes into a house I had paid for in full, in cash, 4 months earlier. They thought it was empty. They thought I was somewhere else, the way I had been somewhere else every Christmas of my life. Welcome back to Secret Family Payback. I'm Nora, I'm 34, and this is the story of the lake house that never had a bunk for me, and the one Christmas I let my family walk straight into the trap I built on its shore. If you've ever been the one left behind while everyone else packed the car, this one's for you. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. For 19 winters, my family spent Christmas at Lake Calloway in a rented cabin. I went exactly twice. The other years I stayed in town with my grandmother, while my parents and my younger brother Caleb drove off without me. "There's only so much room at the cabin, honey," my mother would say. "It only sleeps 4. I was 7 the first time I heard that, and I understood it the way a 7-year-old understands anything that hurts. Not the reason, just the shape of it. On the cabin's mantel sat an old guest book, every name on its cover carved by someone who had actually slept there. My father's, my mother's, Caleb's, carved the first Christmas he was old enough to hold a knife. Mine was never carved in. I asked about it once, at 9. My mother took the knife from my hand so fast I cut my thumb. "That's not for everyone," she said, not unkindly, just final. After that, I'd lie awake picturing that cover filling with names that weren't mine. I left the day I turned 18, with $900 I'd saved in secret and a bus ticket far enough away that no one would drive past to check on me. My mother hugged me at the door and said, "Call when you land." I cried once on the bus, then stopped, because crying had never once earned me a name carved into anything. I started sweeping sawdust for a contractor who paid me cash because I showed up and never complained. I learned what makes a house worth more than the lot it sits on. By 26, I had my own license, 3 employees, and a habit of buying the worst house on a good street and selling it for more than anyone thought it could be worth. I called the company Shoreline Restoration, a joke only I was in on. I worked every Christmas on purpose because the loneliest day of the year pays the best overtime when you're the one swinging the hammer. If you've ever built something out of the exact thing nobody gave you, you already know how this feels. Stick around, it gets worse before it gets good. Subscribe so you don't miss it. My brother Caleb grew up inside a version of our family that had room for him. When he sank 20,000 borrowed dollars into a one-boat charter business, my father co-signed the loan without blinking. The last time I saw everyone together was my grandmother's funeral. In the church basement, Caleb found me at the sink refilling coffee, a little drunk on the bad funeral wine. "You don't have to do that," he said. "Nobody expects you to." Then almost gently, "You were never really part of this, Nora, the lake thing. That was never going to be your spot." He wandered off for more wine. I dried my hands and decided right there to stop waiting for a name carved into someone else's mantle. Shoreline Restoration grew slowly, and then all at once. By last year, I had 4 crews and a reputation good enough that the wealthiest families on 3 lakes handed me their keys for the winter. My family had no idea, because they never asked. They never saw what was coming. I found it in late summer, the one estate on Lake Calloway that had sat empty for 2 years, a stone house on the only private stretch of shoreline left, with its own dock and a wall of windows facing the exact view I used to imagine from my grandmother's couch. I paid cash, every dollar earned with my own hands. The deed listed one owner, mine. I should have let that be the happy ending. It took 3 weeks for word to reach my mother. She called, light as anything. "I hear you bought a place out on Calloway. We'd love to see it." 2 days later, Caleb texted for the first time in over a year. How many acres, what I'd paid, then one that made me set my phone down. "Is it just your name on it?" I'd run a business long enough to know what it sounds like when someone is sizing up an asset instead of asking about your life. So I called a real estate attorney, Priya Shah, and asked flatly whether a house could be taken from someone who legally owned it outright. There was the kind of pause a professional makes before telling you something you won't like. "More often than you'd think," she said. "Most of the time it isn't a stranger. It's someone the victim would have let in the front door." She told me about a free county fraud alert that flags the instant anything gets recorded against your property. I enrolled that afternoon and told no one. If you've ever felt your family circle something the second you finally had something worth circling, you know exactly where this is going. Subscribe now, because what they tried next isn't what you'd expect. The full picture came through a cousin in November. Caleb's charter business had collapsed, and the loan my father co-signed had come due, close to $70,000. My parents had nothing left to bail him out with. I stood in my kitchen looking out at the lake and did the math. A brother raised to believe someone would always make room for him, and a sister with the one unmortgaged asset in the family. In December, my mother called with an invitation that hadn't existed in 19 years. Come to the cabin, the whole family together. There's room for you this year, Nora. I told her I'd think about it. Then Caleb's text turned specific, asking where I kept my deed, whether it was somewhere a person could find. Then his wife, Dana, called. Friendly at first, before asking something very particular. A quitclaim transfer for tax purposes. And did the county actually check signatures, or just file whatever you handed across the counter? That is not a tax question. My mother called once more and said the quiet part without meaning to. It's such a big house for one person out there. A place like that ought to be for the whole family. You know how it is, and there's only so much room. The same sentence that had kept me off that lake for 19 years now meant a house with my name on it was just one more chair that needed clearing away. I called a detective, Marcus Olin, who'd worked a deed fraud before. A forged deed is worthless until someone can show possession, he said, and the fastest way to take possession of a house is to take it when everyone believes it's empty. We both knew which night my family would believe that. They'd spent 19 years building the story that I spent Christmas alone, unwanted. That story was about to catch them, so I declined the cabin gently. I think I'll just have a quiet one at the lake house, I told my mother, and heard her satisfaction settle through the phone. She thought she'd confirmed the house would be empty. She'd actually confirmed the date. On Christmas Eve, I parked 2 streets away and walked back in the dark. Every window stayed black. Inside, it was anything but empty. Detective Olin and 2 officers waited out of sight. A reporter who'd been covering property fraud all fall sat tucked into the boathouse loft with a camera. And I sat in the dark front room with a folder on my lap, holding the only 2 pages that mattered. I heard tires on gravel before I saw headlights. A locksmith's bag hit the porch. My mother's voice, quiet. Are we sure about this, Caleb? And Caleb, Mom, it's legal now. It's ours. The lock gave with a click I recognized from 19 Decembers of imagining this exact house, and the door swung open into the dark, and my family walked into my home uninvited for the first time. Caleb came in waving the forged deed like a flag. Would you look at this place? All this for her, and now it's ours. His wife was already moving deeper with a flashlight, talking about changing the locks before morning. My parents came in last, my mother's hand on my father's arm. It's so big, she murmured, sounding almost frightened of it. Then Caleb turned a slow circle in my dark hall and laughed. She was never going to fit out here anyway. I reached over and turned on the lamp. The room flooded with light, and for one frozen second, nobody moved. Then the detective stepped out with his badge already raised, officers behind him, a camera shutter already clicking from the loft above. Caleb's mouth opened and closed around nothing. What is this? He finally said, then louder, panic cracking through. What did you do, Nora? Merry Christmas, I said, and my voice didn't shake. You can put the deed down. The officers would rather you didn't wave it around. It came apart fast after that. The forged quitclaim filed 3 weeks earlier. The fraud alert that flagged it the moment it was recorded. The texts asking where I kept it. It was my father who didn't run. While Caleb was walked to the car, still shouting that the house was legally his, my father sat down on my front steps, an old man all at once, and put his face in his hands. I always knew it wasn't fair, he said without looking up. I knew it every Christmas and never said a word. I didn't tell him it was all right because it wasn't. But I finally asked the question I'd carried since I was 7. Why was it always me? He told me about a son, born before Caleb, who had drowned in that lake at 2 years old, long before I existed, and how my mother had never stopped associating that water with losing a child, and how keeping me away every Christmas had never really been about room. It was a fear she'd never said out loud, dressed up as a sentence about bunk beds. She lost a son to that water, I said quietly, and spent my whole childhood keeping me away from it instead of telling me why. He had no answer for that, and for once I didn't need him to. Caleb and his wife were charged with forgery and filing a fraudulent instrument. The case never reached a jury. The $70,000 he tried to solve by stealing my house is still $70,000, except now it sits underneath a felony record. The deed was voided within weeks, and the house was mine again on paper, exactly the way it had always been mine in fact. My mother was never charged, only exposed when the reporter's story ran. My father writes me letters now in his shaky handwriting. I haven't answered yet. I haven't thrown them away either. The next Christmas, I had that old guest book shipped to me from the cabin, which my parents finally sold to cover what was left of the debt. I sat at my own table by the window, overlooking the lake, and with a steadier hand than the one that once cut my thumb, I carved my own name into the cover myself. Then I filled the house with the people who had actually shown up for me. 12 places, every single one of them on purpose. For 19 years, I believed belonging was something my family handed out, like a spot in a cabin they decided was too small. It never was. It was a shoreline I had to build myself, name carved in by my own hand. If you've ever been the one left behind while the car pulled out of the driveway, build your own this year and carve your name into it. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, drop a comment below, and subscribe for more.